During the Pax Romana, the Western Roman Empire was stable economically, politically, religiously, and they had a pretty good army too. However, once Rome stopped conquering and expanding their empire, things seemed to fall apart, and the Roman Empire appeared to be doomed. Although this may seem like an instantaneous event, the Western Roman Empire's downfall was a gradual process involving many different key elements.
One of the major problems were economic. Rome was built upon and relied upon continuous conquest and expansion that provided the empire with resources and land. After a certain point, however, Rome could not expand anymore. They had reached a point where they had to stop and could not keep growing. This immediately presented huge problems for the empire and army. Resource flow to the empire decreased. Not only did the resource flow from conquest stop, the army demanded funds to be supported as well. Eventually, expensive mercenaries and foreign troops began serving in the army too. Furthermore, Rome overtraded. The government could not keep up with the rate gold and silver and other resources were being exported out of the empire for the many goods that were coming in its place. Rome put itself in a lot of debt that it could not pay off. These two issues went hand in hand and advanced and fed off one another. This forced the government to raise taxes in place of the resources that came with conquest, and when that was not enough, they also debased the silver in the coin. Here you can see a picture of the coins as they lost their silver through time. This led to a heavy inflation. Inflation caused a vicious cycle that increasingly made the Roman currency worth less and less. The government minted more and more coins to make up for the devaluation of the currency and raised taxes even further. This combination hit many of the urban city dwellers and paid laborers hard. It caused huge economic strain upon the empire. The army also put a lot of strain on the empire because they held a lot of power and demanded a lot of money. Emperors were often killed and new ones appointed by the army.
Speaking of an army, let's talk about some of the problems in the military. Before Diocletian's reforms, the military was unstable. The army did not have enough people in it and was increasingly corrupt. To fix this problem, Diocletian enlarged the army by recruiting barbarians. This seemed to be a good idea at first. However, people became worried about the loyalty of the barbarians. This wasn't problematic at all compared to the problems with the generals. Generals were becoming too power-hungry and were taking power from the emperor. To rectify this problem, Diocletian gives the emperor more power to control the military. Rather than allowing few generals to control huge armies, Diocletian empowered more generals with command over less soldiers.
Before Diocletian became emperor, many were fighting over the position. At one time, it was said that 18 men were claiming to be the emperor of the Roman Empire. The fight of who was the emperor distracted the government from trying to resolve the many problems of the empire, and made matters worse. Diocletian took the throne in 284 BC, and found the empire in shambles. He put in a series of reforms, many of which worked for the time being, but were detrimental for the empire in the long run. Diocletian noticed that the empire was too large to run efficiently. He decided to split the empire into the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. The West was Latin-speaking and the East Greek-speaking. Although this allowed the government to focus and work on the empire, it made a permanent split in the empire as a whole. There was a growing dislike between the two empires, and in some cases they were competing. Overall, the split ended up preventing communication and cooperation when it was needed the most. As we already mentioned, Diocletian also adjusted the army so that the army was large enough to protect the empire, but at the same time the power wasn't abused. There was still the problem of the barbarians put in the army, because they weren't willing to do the amount of discipline and training that had made the Roman army strong in the past centuries. Although the army wasn't the best, the reforms were better than nothing. The reforms that Diocletian put in also affected the economy. Since it took money to pay for all of the reforms, the taxes were raised. To make a stable tax base, people and their descendants had to stay with their jobs for their entire lives. Both the high taxes and this lowered the people's incentive to work harder. This led to a lower tax base, making the government have to raise the taxes again. The cycle went on and on.
Rome was built upon principles from a widespread pagan religion. This religion taught that in order for a life to have been worth living, you must achieve highest honor and valor. These ideas supported Rome's capabilities to conquer and remain in control. However, soon Christianity crept into the empire, and the morals which had led Rome to its great conquests and were so long ingrained within the people began to slip away. The Christians' high intolerance to other faiths caused massive internal friction within the empire. They declared Christianity to be the official religion of Rome. They banned all other religions and, by extension, closed any temples that were not Christian. The bans and other acts of the Christians wore away at the pagans until very few were left. Because of this, Christian morals took over the public, and fewer people joined the militaries. They would rather turn the other cheek, as Jesus teaches, rather than fight with others. So the already waning population of the army grew even smaller. It also became fashionable to become a recluse from society in order to focus on their religion. So this caused fewer and fewer people to partake in the community, and a gradual decline in public participation made it easier for so many people to lay claim to rule. This is similar to the different religious ideas that were fighting for power in China.
All of these factors combined resulted in the fall of the Western Roman Empire. There is no clear-cut time as to when the empire fell. However, the majority of historians agree on the date 476 AD. This is highly debatable.